You could easily spend over $100 buying a dovetail jig in the pursuit of perfect dovetail joints, but I'm going to show you that's not necessary. In this video, we're going to show you how to use this Harbor Freight Dovetail Jig, which I purchased for under $40 at Harbor Freight, to get perfect dovetail joints just like this. Before we get started, something you should know. The instructions that come with this jig, they're crap. They're no good. Half the measurements are wrong, it's missing information, but I was able to find another manual for the D2796 Dovetail Jig that is the exact same jig. My assumption is that Central Machinery makes this jig for different companies. So this is a really good manual. I'll put a link in the description to this manual. This is what I went by when we were setting this up. Some additional tools other than the jig that you're going to need. Obviously, you're going to need a router. You're going to need a 1/2-inch router bit. You're going to need a guide bushing with a 7/16 outside diameter. There's different types, depends on your router, what type you get. I'm not using this type. This is a more common type where they screw together. I'm using an interlocking one for my Bosch router. You're going to need a 12mm wrench, a 1/2-inch spacer, and then some type of measuring devices. The more precise, the better. Let's take a minute and talk about the router setup. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to make sure that the bit is protruding above the base, and this is key, 9/16 of an inch. So adjust the height of your bit up or down to make sure you've got a 9/16 inch protrusion from the base of the router. You also want to make sure that your bit will spin freely without hitting the guide bushing. So if you've got a guide bushing that's too tall, make sure you get a shorter bit so that the bit spins freely without touching the guide bushing on your router. Before we talk about the actual setup of the jig, let's talk about board orientation. This is important. So if I was going to put together a drawer box like this would be the front, the back. So basically, these would be my tail boards, and these would be my pin boards. The important thing to remember is every time you put a piece of wood inside this jig, whether it's this way or this way, you want the inside facing outward. So, for example, we're going to lay the box down so the insides are facing up. When I'm doing the left-hand side, so this is the left, this is the right. When I'm doing the left-hand side, I'm going to put my tailboard in the jig like so, and I'm going to take my pin board and I'm going to swing it around and come up this way. So now they're both outside orientations, right? And we'll get into more adjustments here in a second. Similarly, if I'm doing the right-hand side, I'm going to put the tailboard on the right-hand side of the jig. Loosen these up a little bit. And I'm going to take the corresponding pin board and I'm going to put it on the right-hand side of the jig. So all of that works fine for the front, but then what do you do for the back? All you're doing is you're rotating. Take this entire thing. All you're doing is you're rotating your box 180 degrees, like so. And then you would follow the same instruction, right? This would be the tailboard going on the left, and the pin board coming up from the front on the left. So, same process, you're just rotating the box 180 degrees. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So let's start by inserting the tailboard. And what you want to do with this is you want to make sure that the board is always centered between fingers, right? So if this is a 3.5-inch board, so ironically it's going to come to the edge of both of the fingers here. But if it was a shorter board, say it was a 3-inch board, you're going to split the difference between these two fingers and line it up like so. To adjust the stop on the side here, you're going to use your wrench to loosen this bolt, and then you can tweak this over to make sure that your board is completely centered on those fingers. There you go. To align the pin board, you're going to come up from underneath here, and you want to offset this a 1/2 inch away from this edge. So in order to do that, I'll move the board over a 1/2 inch. I'll use my spacer to determine how far I'm over. And once I've got the board in place, I'll slide this over to my piece of wood and I'll tighten up the bolt. So to adjust the tension on the hold downs, you can loosen and tighten these knobs until you get them to the right position. And then the same thing on the front here. You've got these 2 knobs in the front that you can turn to adjust your tension. The key is you want to make sure that when this is all clamped down, that these boards are at the same height here. In order to determine how far back to set the fence from the edge of the fingers, what we're going to do is we're going to measure the distance from the outside of our bushing on our router to the outside here. And when I measure mine, I am 2 11/16. So just under 2 3/4 inches. So if I go to 2 11/16 on this chart, which the chart's available on page 13 of the guide that I linked, I'm going to follow that across to the thickness of the wood I'm working with, which is 3/4 inch. And it tells me that my distance on my fence from the front of the fingers to the back here should be 4 inches. So I've already preset mine to 4 inches before, but you want to make sure that when you're doing that, you want to make sure that when you're setting it at 4 inches, you're doing it on both sides so that it's even all the way across, right? So get it close here and then measure the same thing over here. Make sure you tighten that up at 4 inches so that you get a perfect depth of cut. There you go. One more thing before we get started on the cut. I recommend you put some kind of a scrap piece of wood on this side. This will help you with any tear out. So there's 2 steps that you want to manage through on the tear out side. The first is I like to take a light pass across here with the router first so that I can get a nice clean score here. And then having this here so that I don't get any tear out on the final end here helps as well. So let me demonstrate for you how to do the cut. And there you go, perfect dovetail. A little bit of tear out over here, which that's okay. That's because I didn't put a backer board there, but like I said, just be careful with the tear out. Make sure, probably be a good idea to put a backer board on both sides just to avoid that. Let's talk about dialing this in for some adjustments. So the first thing I would say is if you put your joint together and the joint is loose, you're going to want to adjust the depth of your bit on your router. So in this case, if the joint's too loose, you want to increase the distance that this is protruding up from the base. And I would recommend doing it like a 30-second at a time, just small little micro adjustments. So make this longer if it's loose and drop it down and make it shorter if it's too tight. That's the first adjustment. The second adjustment that I would talk about is the left to right. So if you've got a gap, like I got a hairline gap here, right, where there's a little bit of overlap, in order to adjust for that, what you would do is you would move this piece of your fence either this way or this way, just a hair for the offset. So in this case, I am too far this way. I need to move it this way a little bit. So look at where your gap is. So here the gap is on the left-hand side, which means I'm going to go that way. If the gap was on the right-hand side, based on the pin board, I would go this way. So as you can see, you can get perfect dovetails even with this $40 jig versus those jigs that you pay $100 or more for. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and got something from it. If so, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. Until next time, take care.